Every year, millions of travelers use airlines to deliver them to their destinations. Flight is the best value and most convenient means of long-distance transportation in the world. Passengers book their flights in the belief that the industry cares about the customer, spending vast sums of money on research and technology to make their services safe. Statistically, they're assured flying is safer than crossing the road. But year in, year out, there are incidents that challenge this accepted wisdom. And all too often, the glossy corporate images are replaced with those of terrible destruction. Safety standards throughout the world differ greatly. For flights in or out of the U.S., the FAA expects airlines to meet minimum safety requirements. But some don't. And once you're away from the FAA's jurisdiction, all bets are off. You may be flying on planes that have been banned from American skies. And in most cases, no one, not the airline, charter company, travel agency, or tour company, is obligated to inform you. Air accidents are meticulously investigated and documented. With so many lives and such huge profits at stake, every last detail is minutely examined and correlated. In most disasters, there's a chain of factors that combine to cause the tragedy. But the most common factor is air crew error. Air crew, or cockpit error, is responsible for nearly 3/4 of all civil aviation accidents worldwide. The European-developed Airbus A320, the world's first fly-by-wire airliner, was launched with a fanfare of optimism. In June of 1988, one of Air France's first fully operational A320s took off on a demonstration flight, loaded with 130 excited passengers. First, it had to make a flyby for an air show crowd at a nearby airfield. Initially, the onboard computer systems were blamed for the disaster, which claimed 3 lives. But investigators found nothing wrong with the plane, and a commission of inquiry accused the pilot of cowboy-like behavior for pushing the plane beyond its limits. The pilot had failed to judge his height correctly, and despite frantically applying full throttle, the aircraft couldn't regain altitude. A French court convicted the pilot of manslaughter. The pilot of this chipmunk stunt plane misjudged the arc of his dive during a display in New Zealand. Halfway through an intricate display at this 1993 military exhibition in England, a small miscalculation by these 2 Russian pilots resulted in a spectacular example of pilot error. Pilots had 15 seconds to eject safely and avoid certain death.
I got it.
One of the most common types of air accidents is known as controlled flight into terrain, which effectively means crashing into obstacles that the crew did not realize were there. In fact, a passenger is 20 times more likely to be involved in this type of accident than a mid-air collision. Inevitably, controlled flight into terrain almost always involves an element of crew error. To help reduce the incidence of aircrew error, most modern airliners are equipped with flight management systems, which navigate the aircraft between strategically positioned beacons along the flight path. FMS is particularly useful during long-distance night flights. However, FMS depends on accurate input from the flight crew. A manual change of course or altitude, not input by the crew, can result in the FMS obediently realigning the aircraft toward the next beacon, regardless of obstacles like mountain ranges. Snow, ice, and fog conspired to cause this airliner to skid off the end of the runway. Flat light and glare from the snow were factors in this accident. Weather is frequently listed as a cause of accidents, in that the weather was bad at the time, and the accident probably wouldn't have happened had the weather been good. Loss of control of an aircraft due to mechanical failure like this jammed rear helicopter rotor is one of the greatest tests a pilot can face. As investigators picked through the debris of United Airlines Flight 232 at Sioux City Airport in July 1989, it was difficult to believe that anyone could have survived. The DC-10 had suffered total hydraulic failure, which meant that the pilot had no control of the systems that slow and guide the plane. It hit the runway at 200 miles an hour. Yet amazingly, some passengers walked away from the wreckage unharmed. "184 of the 296 people on board survived, a miracle credited largely to the skill of the pilot, Captain Al Haynes. Engine failure caused the hydraulic system damage, but Captain Haynes stayed remarkably calm as he brought the stricken aircraft in.
I have serious doubts about making the airport. Have you got someplace near there that we might be able to ditch? Unless you get control of this airplane, we're going to put it down wherever it happens to be. 360 at 11, you're cleared to land on any runway. You want to be particular and make it a runway, huh?
This Swedish fighter, losing control over Stockholm, was designed to be Europe's premier strike aircraft. It narrowly missed the crowd gathered to watch its launch. As the test pilot, Lars Radestrom, ejected, the the high-tech aircraft turned into nothing more than an expensive bomb. Radistrom had crashed in the prototype jet 4 years earlier. Engine failure, as in this Turkish Airbus, which plunged 20,000 feet over central Paris, is a common accident cause. Engine fire is inextricably linked to engine failure, but often is more cataclysmic, as ruptured fuel lines can spread flames to the airframe with devastating speed. Fire was a major factor in the world's worst air disaster, in Tenerife in 1977, in which 583 people died after two 747s collided on the runway. Passengers watched in horror as the engine of this Boeing 747 caught fire during takeoff. The pilot shut down the engine and jettisoned the fuel, a necessary safety precaution that carried the risk of reignition. On landing, the passengers' gratitude was self-evident. In an aging world fleet, the chances of structural failure will inevitably continue to rise as time passes. Experts said that it was 50-1 against the pilot managing to land this Boeing 737 after the roof blew off on approach in Hawaii in 1988. The stewardess was sucked out of the 20-year-old jet, but luckily all the passengers were wearing seat belts at the time of the structural failure in preparation for landing. Once again, it was the skill of the pilot that prevented a terrifying ordeal from becoming a catastrophe, and survivors were quick to thank him. On many airlines, chances are nearly 50-50 you'll fly on vintage planes that took their maiden voyages no later than the Carter administration. All major U.S. carriers have planes in their fleet that are more than 25 years old. Airliners' airframes are like balloons, expanding and contracting every time they take off and land. The stresses they're put under are huge. This jumbo's cargo door ripped free just after takeoff. Investigators discovered an 8-inch hole in the roof of this TriStar. Age may have played a factor in the crash of TWA Flight 800 off of Long Island in July of 1996. An explosion in the center fuel tank of the 25-year-old Boeing 747 caused the plane to break apart, sending all 230 passengers and crew to their deaths. Although the exact cause of the explosion may never be known, investigators suspect that an electrical problem ignited fuel and air fumes in the center fuel tank. At first, the investigation focused on the possibility that a bomb or a missile caused the 25-year-old jumbo jet to explode in midair. But those possibilities have been ruled out. One NTSB official suggested that damaged wires and corrosion of a fuel probe could have caused the fuel tank to explode, but also admitted that many of the other potential ignition sources may also be age-related. Coming up, a close look at some causes when air disasters returns on TLC. Civil Aviation Authority publishes an annual